So many of you guys know this, and some of you guys may not. Number three cylinder has always been the sought after for problems from overheating, engine problems, all kinds of things. And Volkswagen engineers knew this in the beginning and did the things that they could do to try and make it not happen as much. But let's talk about why is number three cylinder, which is this one right here, the problem child for Volkswagens. Well, I'll tell you guys right off the bat, on your distributor, if you guys watched my distributor video, you know this already, but some of you guys don't know this, and I know that a lot of people don't know this. But number three cylinder, which is right here on your distributor, typically, if it's not right here, you've got a problem. That distributor drive needs to be dropped correctly. But number three cylinder, number three, is retarded. So the timing on number three on the factory distributor is retarded. And the reason they did that is because then number 1, 2, and 4 would do more of the work of the engine. And number 3 got a little leisure ride. So that was the way that they combated it from the factory to try and keep number 3 from getting hot. All of us have done a lot of different things over the years to change the engineering on that to make number 3 work better. Let's kind of go over some of those things that we did, and some of them work, some of them don't. Maybe you guys can learn from this. So anyway, let's get started. Number 3. First of all, it's the furthest cylinder from the fan. The fan's right here, the intake's right here, goes in, and number 3 is way over in the corner over here, and that's why she gets hot. And that's the number one reason. That's number one, but if for some reason there was no obstructions inside here and the airflow was good, it shouldn't be an issue that much, just that it's a little further away. So what a lot of us did in the early days is we did not have very many doghouse fan shrouds. And people go, what? Doghouse fan shrouds were everywhere. Okay, I'm talking about in the 80s. Okay, in like 85, a 1975 car was only 10 years old. So they came out with the doghouse in 1971. So in the early 80s, a 71 was just barely turning 10 years old. It might have gone in for its first rebuild, or maybe it got rebuilt a couple times by then. But we were, short on parts. Getting a doghouse fan shroud was like pulling teeth. Nobody wanted to get rid of them because they really work good. Okay, the doghouse fan shroud. The only thing you could get was aftermarket doghouses, and back then, a lot of times the inside of the doghouse, they would just gut the whole thing, and they weren't made correctly, and the airflow wasn't working the same as the aftermarket ones. So, as the original ones. So they were always sought after. Always sought after. Doghouse fan shrouds were like pulling teeth. They were very hard to get. People go, what? They were, Volkswagens were everywhere. Yeah, they were everywhere, but not the late models. The late models, again, they were less than 10 years old or just barely turning 10 years old. In 77, the last Beetle was made, right? In 87, that was a 10-year-old car, so it was pretty new. And then they still made the convertible a couple years later, 78 and 9. But 77, I think, was the last hardtop Beetle, if I remember correct. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's been a long time since I've thought about this stuff. So, anyway, this is not a doghouse fan shroud because it does not have a big dog door on the back and then a little, what they had is it was a doghouse, they called it, because it would go out this way and air was directed to flow out through the cooler, and that hot air from the cooler would come out a little door down here. And that's what everybody still even wants today. And they've made some aftermarket ones. They're actually more available now than they ever were. So you can buy them new, and they're not terribly expensive in comparison to what they were back in the 80s. So let's talk about how that this came about. And why number 3 was really a big problem for a lot of the engines back in the early days. The original coolers on the Volkswagen was a stand-up cooler that basically stands right here on the engine. It stands right here, okay? And the air goes through it. It has very small ports. Yeah, air's flowing through that sucker just fine, isn't it? If you could see, it had this screen thing on it, and air had trouble getting through these. So they worked pretty well to keep the oil cool, but they neglected number 3. So at every show, you would see really primitive versions of this. This is way nicer than the stuff they had back then. You'd see these oil coolers like this for sale with an adapter and a kit that would go on where the oil cooler bolts to the engine. And what you do is you'd cut a hole in the back of your tin. And what guys were doing, and believe me, if your car's done this way right now, take this off of there, okay? They would put this cooler over the fan like that, a cooler like this over the fan, and instead of getting number 3 to run cooler, it would make all the cylinders run hotter. So if you put this, because we figured out that this thing here, restricting the airflow from the fan, did more damage than good. It did not work. So if you've got a car right now with one of these over the fan, take it off there. Believe me, you'll do yourself a huge favor. It's the problem. And one of the reasons that we didn't have those, didn't do this, what I'm going to show you in a second, because this primitive fan is what fans look like when you saw on cars. They didn't have really nice fans like this, a little profile, lots of blades on it, blows a lot more air, better airflow. They didn't have stuff like this. They just didn't, there just wasn't stuff like that available. So we actually figured out that even just putting this cooler off to the side by itself, just getting airflow from the wind, was better than putting it over the hole on the fan shroud. And it actually worked and made it run cooler even without this. But when we finally found some of these that became available, we started putting these on the fan, on the coolers, and it was a vast improvement over the factory cooling system. So, and this is on your single ports, guys, mostly, on your, not your single ports, but your single relief cases. So on your dual relief cases, a lot of those already had the doghouse, or I don't know, sometimes we'd be able to acquire them, but they were, like I said, they were sought after. A newer car that had a doghouse didn't blow up like the early ones did, so we were constantly trying to chase it on the earlier cars by doing this type of thing. And at that time, we were just putting an adapter on here and getting that oil cooler away from the fan. Getting it completely away from the fan worked much better. So that was a huge improvement. Well, nowadays, you have the doghouse fan shroud. Is like, you can just buy them new. They're available all over the place. The ones from AA Performance have all the air veins in them and everything. And the ones that we used to get back in the days would just be one big hole inside, and it didn't work very well. So you had those, or you had the guys with the fan shroud that kind of just went down, and then they would put that adapter on there and run this. So after a little bit of time, we figured out the full flow system, which is to drill into the side of the case, put some fittings in there, put a fitting on your oil pump so you guys know what the full flow system is, and have both coolers. You could have two of these. You could have one for off of the engine and then another one off of there, or just have just this one off of there, because the ports, the oil ports on the cooler portion of the engine are a little smaller on the single relief cases. So, and on the 40 horse especially, they're tiny little things. So you could get more oil cooling done by using a full flow system. And then what we would do is also put the doghouse on. So we put a doghouse on and have a full flow cooler. Pretty much solved number 3 problems. Anybody, you tell me in the comments below if you've seen number 3 problems when you have a full flow oil cooler and doghouse fan shroud. Tell me you've got problems, because I'm going to tell you more than likely there isn't going to be anybody commenting that they have problems about that. So my theory on this, and this is, where I know I'm going to get people that don't agree, but I just know by experience, is that once you solve the problem, getting air to number 3, having a retarded number 3 it's not really necessary. So that's why I use the pointless systems, or the MagnaSpark, or this, in this case, this is Shockwave by Pat Downs, who's the guy who created the MagnaSpark, by the way. If you didn't know that, Pat Downs Performance, and eliminate that retarded number 3, end up with a smoother running engine. And if you've got plenty of air on there, like I said, I have not had any overheating problems once I run a doghouse in a full flow. It is everything that I've got that on. I mean, I can just stand on it going up a hill, as long as my compression's not too high. If you have like 9 or 9.5 to 1, or and you stand on it for very long, it's going to get hot. It doesn't matter what you have in there, it's too hot. So, but if you've got, like, let's say 8.25, 8.5, and you're running premium fuel, I've literally been able to just stay on the gas pedal, really mash down pretty hard, and go up a big hill and not get hot. You should always be watching your temperature by listening to the engine. If it's pinging, let off the gas. You can still have issues depending on if you're jetting, if everything's spot on. If you got your jetting on, if you got everything, your compression right, you got the right cam size and everything else, you should be able to pretty much stand on it going up a hill. Unless, like I said, if it's over 8.5 or something like that, you got to watch it a little bit. But this is basically how all this stuff transpired over the years. The reason that number 3 was such an issue in the earlier years, and it's kind of like people in the back east, and I go into a place and I go, "Do you use the ATM?" Oh, I don't use ATMs. Nope, no, I don't use ATMs. I go, "Why?" It's because in the back of their head, if you've been around long enough, you might even remember this. I remember having to pay a convenience fee to use the ATM. Okay. And that stays in your head. It stays in your head, and you go, "Oh, I don't want to use that thing." Last time I used it, it cost me money. Okay. If you're older like me, you might remember that. And then, so you get this negative content in your head, and you think that, oh, it's still that way. No, most of the banks now, they don't charge a fee to use the ATM. In fact, they'll charge a fee to use the teller, but the ATM is free. Okay, so it's changed the opposite. So things change over time is what I'm trying to say. And if you can update your system and go to a point, you can have a smoother running engine. You know, it's going to run smoother. You might not know this. I mean, why do you think Volkswagens had a Lopi idle? It's because number 3 was retarded on the distributor. They didn't run really. They always had that sound, like little, you know, little bit of a Lopi idle, and it was because number 3 is retarded. You get rid of that, put a performance cam in a VW, give yourself a little bit more compression than stock, and make sure that number 3 is solved. You know, either get rid of this cooler or you know, and do one of those things. You know, put one on the outside if you want to do that. Like I did one like this. One of my engines is I wanted to run the stock shroud. So what I did is I put a block off plate. It has a flow area on it. It's a dual relief case, but I have a block off plate on there. Okay, and then all my cooling's done on the outside with a separate cooler. So it kind of does the same thing as a doghouse. And you know, then on top of that, I put on the super cool tin, which was what I have on this engine. I mean, this thing here went all the way up to Big Bear, up in the mountains, thin air up there, flooring it all the way up, just standing on the gas pedal in third, just all the way. No problem. Didn't even get hot. So if you have everything right, is what I'm trying to say, you have enough air and fuel going in there, the mixtures are right, and everything's good. You know, it's not always going to be the case if you got like above 8.5 or something, or around 8, somewhere in there. But you're probably not going to need to floor it all the time if you have that. But the other rig I have, you need to floor it all the time, and I had to make sure that everything will handle that. So I moved the cooler to the outside. I made sure, because I can't run a doghouse on it, so I just made sure that the airflow, there's no restrictions in there. You saw that cooler, that sucker restricts a huge amount of air to number 3, because number 3 and 4, but number 3 is furthest away, so it's the first one to go. That's just why it happens. So once you solve the issues, you know, tell me, guys, if you have a full flow system or a doghouse and or both, okay, have you ever blown a number 3 piston? Have you done it? Like to know, because I haven't. I haven't seen it. You know, not even with and I'm talking about if you got a non-retarded pointless in there. Have you done it? Be curious to know. Comment below. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.